Hi everyone, so today I'm going to try really hard to explain how I draw my patterns for a skirt. To be more specific, the pattern is for a skirt with an overlay flap. These are the measurements that I'm going to use, but you can follow along using your measurements. After getting my pattern paper, the first thing I'm going to do is draw a horizontal line and then a vertical line. The horizontal line will become my waistline. Taking my waist measurement of 30 inches, I'm going to divide that by 4. That is 7.5 inches. I'm going to mark 7.5 on my waistline like so. I'm adding an extra inch for the dart. I am taking my hip line measurement of 8 inches and marking it down from the waist point. Then I'm going to draw a straight horizontal line from that point. I will label that line my hip line. Taking my hip measurement, I'm going to divide that by 4. This gives me 9.25. Then I'm going to mark 9.25 along my hip line. Next, I'm going to mark my full length from the waist down on the vertical line. Then I'm going to draw a straight horizontal line. Taking my quarter hip measurement of 9.25, I'm moving to my full length line, taking away 1 inch and then marking that point. Next, I'm going to join the waistline to the hip line using a curved ruler. I later decided not to put a vent at the back of the skirt, so I added half an inch back to my full length line. I am now joining the full length line to the hip line. I am going to measure and mark the midpoint of the waistline. Then I'm adding half an inch on both sides of the midpoint. Next, I am drawing a straight line from the midpoint about 5 inches down. Then I'm going to join the 2 half-inch marks to the 5-inch mark, like so. Next, I'm going to measure half an inch above the edge of the waist, like so. Then I'm going to join the hip line to this new waist point. Then I'm going to connect that new waist point with the waistline. I am making sure not to pass where the dart begins, just to keep it simple. Then I'm going to add my 1 inch seam allowance everywhere on the pattern except for the vertical line. I didn't have enough pattern paper at the top, so I added a seam allowance of 0.5 inches at the waist instead. Now I'm going to cut it out. So this is the front pattern. So starting on my back pattern, I will be drawing a vertical line 2 inches away from the edge of the paper. This is where the zip allowance is. After drawing the vertical line, I will draw my horizontal waistline. Just as I did with the front pattern, I will measure my hip line down from the waist, and then I will draw a horizontal line. Then I'm going to mark my full length line. I'm also going to add my 1 inch seam allowance. Then I'm going to draw a horizontal line and a second one for the seam allowance. Taking my previously calculated quarter waist measurement, which was 7.5 inches, I'm going to mark that point on the waistline. Then I'm adding an extra 2 inches for 2 darts. Then taking my quarter hip measurement of 9.25 inches, I'm going to mark that point on the hip line. I'm also adding my seam allowance at this point. As I did with the front pattern, I'm marking 1/2 inch above the waist at the side seam. Then I'm adding my 1 inch seam allowance. I'm joining the waistline to the hip line with my curved ruler. I'm doing the same with my seam allowance. Again, taking my hip line measurement of 9.25 inches, I'm going to minus half an inch. Then I'm going to mark that point on my full length line. Then I will add an inch for my seam allowance. Then I'm going to join my hip line to my full length line. For the darts, I'm taking my current waist measurement, which is 9.5 inches. Then I'm going to divide that by 3, which is approximately 3.1 inches. I'm going to mark 1 point, 3.1 inches from the vertical line. Then I'm going to mark another point, 3.1 inches from the first point. If you're still following at this point, well done. So I'm going to draw a vertical line straight down at both points. I'm going to measure 5 inches down one line, and then I'm going to measure 2.5 inches down the other line. Then I'm going to measure and mark 0.5 inches on both sides of the point. Then I'm going to join them like this. I am now going to extend my side seam to the point that we left earlier, right above the waistline. Then I'm going to connect that point to the waistline, making sure not to touch the dart again. Then I'm going to add my waist seam allowance of half an inch. Then I'm going to cut it. And that is it for the back pattern piece. You can go ahead and make a skirt with just these two pieces. But for the specific style I mentioned at the beginning, there is one more pattern piece left. First, you place the front pattern piece on top of a blank pattern paper. The paper can have whatever dimensions you're going for. This one I'm using was roughly 13 inches wide. So the first thing I'm doing is tracing out my front pattern piece onto the blank pattern paper. Then I'm going to extend out the waistline, the full length line, and the hip line. Then I'm just going to draw a line from my waistline to my hip line at an angle, like so. Then for a short flap like the one I'm making in this video, I draw a line from my hip line to my full length line, like so. Using a miniature version of my pattern, I'm going to attempt to explain how to draw a longer flap pattern piece. So as I showed you earlier, I'm going to place the front pattern piece on top of the blank pattern paper. Then I'm going to trace out the pattern. Then I'm going to extend the full length line, the hip line, and the waist line. I'm just going to draw the vertical line so you can easily see what I'm trying to explain. The The vertical line is the same as the vertical line on the front pattern. There is nothing different about it. I just traced it out. Again, as I did before, I'm going to connect the waistline to the hip line at an angle like this. So if I was drawing the short flap like I did earlier, I would join the hip line to the full length line at this point. If I was going for a longer flap piece, I would move where my full length line starts, and I will move it lower on the pattern paper. Then I will join my hip line to my new full length line at an angle. Then I'm going to cut around it. And this is what it would look like. Now back to my main pattern. I'm going to cut this one out now. And that is it. We are donezo. I like to add paper tape at the edge of all of my patterns to make it easier when I'm tracing onto the fabric. So this is a flap that I made earlier on that is longer than the skirt itself, which gives it the asymmetrical look. If you got to the end, thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe so that I can continue to do this.